If we need more, we'll have to make some more, and I'll get them to you later. But in Genesis chapter 1, in verse 1, it says, "In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth." If you're a Christian, the debate should stop right there. There's no more debate. That's what it says. The Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. And so it's a done deal, it's settled, and we're ready to accept that. The problem arises when people try to make a way for there to be an existence without the presence of God. And so they have to come up with different theories. And one of these theories is the evolution theory. And so, the creation versus evolution debate is not a battle of science versus the Bible or science versus faith. It's a battle between two starting points. It's a battle between God's Word and man's Word, and which starting point you choose will determine how you interpret the evidence. If you look at the debate, the evolutionists use the same evidence that the creationists use. They look at the same fossils, they look at the same stars, they look at the same rates of decay and all these things that they see. They use the same evidence, and it's just a matter of where their foundation is. In the Bible, though, we have I only put a few of the verses down that mention that God takes credit for creating the heavens and the earth. In Isaiah 45:12, he says, "I have made the earth and created man upon it. Even my hands have stretched out the heavens, and all their host have I commanded." And when you think about him stretching out the heavens, that our galaxy is like 100 billion light years across or something like that, and that there's, we'll get into how many galaxies there are a little bit later in this lesson, but the fact that God stretched so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. Colossians chapter 1, verse 16, "For by him are all things created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him." And we recognize that Jesus Christ was present at the creation, that he's part of the Godhead, and that it is through the Word of God, and that Word became flesh and dwelt among us, as it says in John the 1st chapter. And so when it talks about words, words are important, and that's why we need to define the terms. It says that God spoke and the earth was made. He spoke, "Let there be light," and there was light. He said, "Let the dry land appear, and let the lakes and rivers be formed." And he said all those things, and let the fish and the fowl come out. And he said those things, and they appeared. And so the Word of God is important. And it's his authority that he uses. And so we need to define the terms, and there's been much misunderstanding because there's a bait and switch thing that goes on when you talk to evolutionists. Because they will take a term, and we're going to look at some of these terms here, and they will use it in one way, and they'll show it in one way, and then they'll extrapolate to mean something greater and farther beyond the truth. And so it is very important that you are careful and clear, and it might actually resolve some problems with some people. The first term we need to look at is science. Proper scientific methodology is limited in the sense that all scientific hypotheses should be testable and based on recordable, measurable observations in the present. Operational science is measurable, quantitative, mechanical, and correctable. And so all those things about science, they try to say, and they try to actually frame the debate by saying creation versus science, or creationism versus evolution. And creation isn't opposed to science. It's not against science. Science is something that we should be careful when we talk about it. Operational science is something that we can observe, and hypotheses is something that we can observe and do. And so how many know of anybody other than God that observed the beginning of our universe? All right? Is there any scientist that has a video recording of what happened when God said, "Let there be light"? Or in their terms, maybe the Big Bang happened. There's nobody that observed that. And we can only extrapolate, we can only look at what is here and then try to figure out what happened. And is that accurate? That's not that accurate most of the time, the best way is if you had a witness that saw what happened and they wrote it down. And fortunately, we do. Who is our witness? God is our witness. And he wrote it down. He revealed it to mankind. And, you know, I was out hunting yesterday with Chad. We were looking for rabbits, you know, and we saw evidence where the rabbits had been, all right? And I couldn't tell you from the tracks exactly what the rabbits did when they stopped everywhere, but I could tell that rabbits had been there. All right, we didn't get any rabbits because they were all hiding from us very well. But sometimes we look at what's left behind and we can get a wrong picture because we don't know all the facts about the situation. And that's what's probably happened in this evolutionary debate. Science is often employed sloppily, especially when methods, procedures, and practice of inquiry are not carefully followed. And so maybe a better definition of science would state that it is a body of knowledge obtained by using our senses in the present, especially observation. And so in that sense, the science and research practices of both creationists and evolution involve the same techniques, the same equipment, the same objects. They measure the same entities, and those things are the same for each investigator. And so, they're not opposed to science. People, including scientists, though most people, including scientists, consider the biblical teachings of origins to be religious and consider evolutionary ideas to be scientific, we should challenge such a view. In the secular media, the debate is often described as creationism versus evolution instead of evolutionism, as if it shouldn't apply. But they treat it like it's a dogma. You know, they treat it like it's one of their tenets of their religion. And so that brings us to the second term here, religion. And so religion is beliefs and worships, practices, procedures, and conduct that are involved in a belief system. It purports to be a total explanation of reality. And so that's what religion is. And so in defining Darwinian evolution, they try to extrapolate and try to say that this is how the earth came to be, and they hold that by faith. That's a tenet of their religion. Basically it's humanism, and this is one of their tenets, is evolution. And so for them to say that it's evolution versus religion or evolution versus creation is kind of false. It's framing the argument in a false way. And actually, they have a religion and you have a religion. You both believe different things because of the Bible or because of the way you've been raised. But don't call creation wrong and call it religion and then say, well, evolution is science and this is fact and this is all these things, when it's just as much a religion and based on faith, maybe even more so than creation. The word evolution, and this is another term that people use sloppily, because evolution simply means change. It means slow, gradual change. That's all evolution means. And so they'll take a change where it's like and they're talking a vertical change where one species changes to another species. And they'll use horizontal changes where there's small changes within a kind or within an organism, maybe through selective breeding. You know, we know through DNA that all dogs came from one pair of dogs. All right, and that counts from Chihuahuas up to Great Danes and Irish Wolfhounds and all those things like that. And then the absolute bottom of the gene pool is the poodle, right? Yeah, so that's very good. You know, but if you looked at a Chihuahua next to an Irish Wolfhound, and you'd say, wow, look at they evolved from one species to another. No, they're still dogs. And you could probably, I don't know how it would physically, the limitations are there, but you could probably breed those two dogs together. I don't know what would happen, but I would hate to see that happen, actually. But anyway, that's that's horizontal evolution. That's within a species, and we do that. We see that if even in the human population, there's changes in certain areas of the country. People have lighter or darker skin, or they're shorter, they're taller, they have different facial features, and so forth, because they're isolated, but we are all of one blood and one race. And we see that, but what happens is they use those horizontal changes as an excuse to make a vertical. Well, if this happens, then it can change from, if we just give it enough time, and time is a magic ingredient that they do there. And so we need to distinguish that and make sure that they're not talking about fish to philosopher evolution or molecules to man evolution, but what are you exactly saying, and why are you saying that? Anyway, so, and then we also need to differentiate between hypothesis and theory. The first term should be reserved for any proposed explanation that can be investigated with testable and observable scientific practice. In contrast, the term theory should be used only to describe a well-tested, widely supported, long-standing hypothesis. And so, many times you don't hear people say evolutionary theory. Or they'll say creation theory. They will just take it as a fact, and when actually it should not be a fact. And a lot of these things are based on hypotheses. There are things that could be true, and there's some evidence that kind of looks that way, but it doesn't mean it's a fact. And people will substitute those things in there kind of easily. And then measurement or estimate. All right, can we measure how old the earth is? No, because we'd have to observe it from its beginning until now. We can't measure it. We can estimate to see how old the earth is, just like you can do with a tree. Can you measure how old a tree is? Well, you can count its rings, and you can estimate that it was this old, and you can, but to observe, and we can observe that, well, every year it makes a new ring and things like that, and we can estimate the tree's age. Anyway, scientists can estimate, and they do attempt to estimate the age of the universe and the age of the earth. And I was reading a little bit about the radiometric dating method, but they do have to make some assumptions. And what happens is you can take those dating methods and date rocks where you know the age of the rock because it's a lava flow. It formed in this volcano that erupted on this date. And so you can test how old, and some of those the lava flows they've dated millions of years old that they knew were only 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And so those methods are called into question. But if you doubt that, or if you call, they'll say, well, you're just washed up. You don't really understand the science of it. And that's what they do. They try to move the argument over and to make it look like you're dumb for believing in creation. No scientist alive today was present when life appeared on this planet, so there can never really be a truly scientific study of the origin of life, nor can there ever be any operational scientific study of the first life on Earth given present technology. But like I said, we do have a written account. God, the Creator, wrote down the account, and we can witness it in Genesis 1 and 2. And so that's an accurate eyewitness account. Another proof, though, that the earth is made by God is God made the earth unique. There's a scientist, and I can't remember his name, but he did a study, and this is in Discovery magazine, but he suggests that there are around 700 quintillion planets in the universe, but only one like the earth. And a quintillion is a 7 followed by 20 zeros. All right, and he started looking at planets, and he said, statistically, You look at all these planets, and you look at, the Earth has to be a certain distance from the sun in a certain zone, and all these in order for life to exist. And just a few factors, and he said statistically the Earth should not exist. It shouldn't even be here, because there are no other planets that we've discovered anywhere around like this. Current estimates hold that there are 100 billion galaxies in the universe, 10 to the 18th power stars, or a billion trillion stars. These are numbers that we can't even wrap our minds around. Astronomers have to this point discovered around 30 exoplanets in the habitable zones of stars in our universe. And so if you extrapolate that figure, there might be 50 billion such planets in the Milky Way alone. And so it seems like with all those billions and billions of planets out there, then at least somewhere there should be one that's like the Earth somehow, but yet it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And so we have these, you guys heard of SETI? That's where they search for extraterrestrial intelligence, and they have these big radar dishes, and they're looking and they're listening, and they've been listening for the last 50 years or whatever it is. And how many intelligent lives have they found? Well, they've only found a few here on this planet, but they haven't found anywhere out there, all right? And it seems like they're missing from the East Coast, where Washington, D.C. is, in fact. But anyway, most planets shouldn't look like the Earth, and statistically, the Earth shouldn't exist. There's a philosopher, astronomer, Carl Sagan. He announced that there were only two important criteria for a planet to support life: the right kind of star and a planet the right distance from that star. But the more that we learn, the more that we know. Today, we know that there are more than 200 known parameters necessary for life to exist on this planet. First of all, it has to be the right kind of galaxy. We live in a spiral galaxy, and it has to be a spiral galaxy. 90% of galaxies as candidates for a planet that could support life, and it also has to be in the right spot in this galaxy. It has to be located in a narrow region between the spiral arms of the spiral galaxy in order for life to exist. And then it has to be the right kind of star. The sun is the perfect kind of star. 75% of the stars in our galaxy are double stars, or more than two stars, so they get eliminated. And a planet cannot exist for long unless the star is single due to the irregular gravity. Can you imagine gravity created by more than one sun, how that would affect the planets around? And it's hard to wrap our mind around that. And also, the star has to be the right temperature. It can't be too hot or too cold. And it has to have the right size and the right mass and be the right distance from the planet. And then we have to have the right kind of planet. And there's so many things. I haven't even listed all of them here, but there's an invisible field around the Earth, a magnetic field, and that protects the Earth from radiation. And it's a giant magnetic field, and it protects life from this radiation that's always traveling through space. And the planet that can support life must be in a very narrow zone around the planet. If it's too close, it'll get sucked in and burned up, and it can't be too far away because it'll be too cold. It also has to be tipped at approximately 23 degrees, which happens to be exactly where the Earth is tipped, 23 degrees. And that allows for the seasons and the more habitable space on the planet. The gravitational pull of the Earth has to be exactly right for keeping water vapor trapped, but it lets methane and ammonia out. Can you imagine that the gravity of Earth is perfect? The mass of the Earth creates the gravity, and it's exactly the right gravity to keep water in, but let ammonia and harmful methane out. And so we don't have to worry about those cow flatulations like Alexandria Cortez or whatever, Ocasio-Cortez. She's kind of worried about the cow flatulations, and I think that God already took care of that way back in before, and so she needs to get off her Green Deal. But the planet that can support life must be in a very narrow zone around the star. And we already talked about that, in the gravitational pull. The Earth rotates on its axes every 24 hours, and this is perfect. If it would go slower, you'd be frozen. If it'd go faster, you'd get too fast, you get the winds would be too strong, they'd blow us away every day. The earth is tilted on 23.4 degrees. More tilt and the climates would go crazy. Less tilt and the livable space would be so small that it wouldn't be that good here. And our moon is just right. It's an abnormally large size for a moon, and its exact distance from the earth is perfect to create the tides. The waters don't get stagnant in the oceans, and it keeps the water moving. It's estimated that the earth would be struck by large meteors 1,000 times more often if Jupiter was not where it's at. And you know, we see huge asteroids that always are striking Jupiter. And if you see a projection on a screen of the size of Jupiter compared to the size of the Earth, it's like, I'm trying to think here, it's like one of those trucks that's in the mine that carries those huge trucks that the tires are taller than people, you know, and compared to a little Tonka truck or a Matchbox truck. You know, that's the size of the Earth compared to Jupiter, kind of. And so Jupiter is exactly the right distance from the Earth. It has a smooth orbit. Saturn has a smooth orbit. And if it didn't have that smooth orbit, nice smooth orbit, it would mess up our orbit here on the Earth. And it protects us like a shield from the Earth. Its gravity is big enough that it pulls in a lot of those meteors and asteroids. And then all the gases in our atmosphere are exactly right. Oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide. And they're exactly the right amount to sustain life. And God has set it up so there's a renewal, and so that plants and grasses and things like that produce oxygen, and we animals and humans produce carbon dioxide, and so we are balanced here. I don't know if you've ever tried to make one of those environmental closed. I've seen a few of those where it's like a closed system. It's a glass encased system where they have like a fish, and they have some plants, and they have water, and they have different things, and it's a biome kind of thing where they try to make it balanced so that each thing produces enough thing for the other thing in the system. All right, it's very, very hard to do. You have to have exactly the right amount of plants. You have to have exactly the right amount of organisms in there eating and digesting and producing. And very few people can do that successfully. And they have to do with limited things. God did that with this whole planet. And it's so complex, and it's so orderly, and it's so well designed that it keeps on going. And to think that this could have happened by an accident, or a series of accidents, is just preposterous. All right? It's an insult to your intelligence. And we have to have all these different things. The miracle of water. Just think about the water. The clouds function as a curtain. They moderate the temperature. They block the sun when the earth becomes too hot, letting sunlight in. And what happens? There's a balance there. When if there's less clouds, more water is evaporated and forms more clouds, and then the earth gets cooled off. And so it's a natural cooling system that God made for the earth with the clouds. The clouds reflect excessive energy, and the earth cools. And so 3/4 of the surface of the earth is water, and so between nearly 3/4 of your body is water, and it's ideal for carbon-based chemistry. And then water freezes when it gets cold, and it expands. It's one of the only things that gets bigger when it gets cold. And this is such a great deal because imagine how hard it'd be for the fishes. I see fishes. I know it's fish. All right. Imagine how hard it'd be for the fish at the bottom of the ocean if they had these huge ice that just kept on sitting there for ages and ages. They would never melt, never thaw out. But that ice forms over the top of a lake, and then everything underneath is insulated. It never gets below 32 degrees, or it doesn't get so cold down there that they can't live. And it just makes that perfect balance. There's so many, they called it the Goldilocks zone. There's so many Goldilocks parameters that it is mind-boggling. The tectonic plates are necessary. The molten core is necessary. Earthquakes are necessary. The correct ratio between oceans and land masses is necessary. And all these things goes on. There's even a balance between the weak nuclear force and the strong nuclear force. And if that balance wasn't perfect, then the Earth couldn't exist. And it had to be perfect the minute that the Earth was created. It had, it couldn't be off at all, or else it would have collapsed on itself. I have this quote here from Oxford physicist Roger Penrose, and he concluded that if we jointly considered all the laws of nature that must be fine-tuned, we would be unable to write down such an enormous number, since the necessary digits would be greater than the number of elementary particles in the universe. Particles in the universe, all right? That's little tiny things, smaller than an atom. And there's more things that are right than that. Sorry about my editing here. I had a hurry, and I'm one of those procrastinators that puts things off the last minute, so I didn't get this exactly right. But the 3 should be all the way to the left of the page, and I'm sorry about that, but you can tell that. Finally, when you look at man, look at the creation of man, God made us pretty special. And David really sums it up in Psalms 139. And this is the NIV version here, I think. It says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. And my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." And the guy, I got a video I'm going to show you here in a second. And the guy, when he talks about, he's going to talk about collagen. And collagen is what all of our skin and tissue and everything is made up of. But it's actually knit together. It is knit together. And that's why it works different ways. And so your bones and your skin and everything is knit together in certain ways. And except for the eyes, it's made different. The collagen in your eye is actually stretched out so it's transparent instead of being opaque like the rest of your skin. And God knits us, makes us, and forms us. And we're going to, hopefully I can get this to work.
It's tough to quit smoking. Cold
Here's the ad I get.
Sagentics can help you quit.
You get ads on YouTube? You go ahead, turn them. Vivian, can you turn that middle lights off?
I was offered a position as Associate Professor of Medicine and Chief of Scientific Visualization at Yale University in the Department of Medicine. And my job was to write many of the algorithms and code for NASA to do virtual surgery in preparation for the astronauts going into deep space flight so they could be cut in robotic pods. One of the fascinating things about what we were actually working on is that we were seeing, using the new kind of scanning technologies, things that had just had never been seen before. I mean, not only in disease management, but also things that allowed us to see things about the body that just made you marvel. I remember one of the first times we were looking at collagen, and your entire body, everything, your hair, skin, bone, nails, everything is made of collagen. And it's a kind of a rope-like structure that twirls and swirls like this. And the only place that collagen changes its structure is in the corner of your eye. In your eye, it becomes a grid formation, and therefore it becomes transparent as opposed to opaque. So perfectly organized a structure, it was hard not to attribute divinity to it, because we kept on seeing this over and over and over again in different parts of the body. One of the opportunities I had was, one person was working on a really interesting kind of micromagnetic resonance imaging machine with the NIH, and what we were going to do is scan a new project on the development of the fetus from conception to birth using these kinds of new technologies. So I wrote the algorithms and code, and he built the hardware. Paul Lauterborough then went on to win the Nobel Prize for inventing the MRI. I got the data, and I'm going to show you a sample of that piece from conception to birth.
Stop it there, because I don't think you go ahead and turn the lights back on. But if you want to watch that video on your own, you can. It just there's some images that might not be appropriate for church that are coming up. So it's just a natural process, though, and it's not sexual. It's not meant to be that way at all. But it's amazing what God does in the womb, isn't it? And to think that we have made it legal in this country to murder that baby after, all the way up to the point of birth. Gina was showing me an article yesterday on Facebook that this lady was cheering because she had had multiple abortions, and she said her first abortion was her best, and if she could, she would do that again. And so I was thinking to myself, she's just a serial killer, and doing that to your child. But I wish Celia was here, and she's 14 weeks pregnant, and so I was thinking of that in that list there. She's right, at 14 weeks, the body's basically developed. It has eyes, it has nose, it has a mouth, it has a head, it has a brain, has all these things. And he goes on in this video to show the blood vessels and the capillaries, and we have 50 or 60,000 miles of blood vessels in our body that that bring food in and out, and they're all working together, doing these things. Only 1 mile of those are visible. The 59,999 are invisible. We can't, well, they're so small we can't see them, but they're working, working in the human body. And then somewhere around five weeks, there's 1 million nerve cells that start at the brain, and they start at the back of the eye, and those millions nerve endings, they meet up and they match perfectly, and at that point we have sight. And to think that God designed this, He put this all together, and to say something else, and He uses the word divinity. We keep on seeing eyes of divinity. I don't know if He can't say God in these TED Talks or what, but to see that it's the eyes of God, or it's the hand of God working in your life to try to make you who you are, and to say that this happened by accident. This happened, a few pieces of muck somewhere got struck by lightning, and it formed some amino acids, and those amino acids somehow turned into life, and they somehow grew, and so now we have a fish, or we have a little protoplasm somehow, and that becomes something else, and then it had a beneficial mutation, and it got new genetic material that didn't exist to grow an arm or a leg, and then to turn that into, eventually it became a fish, and then if that fish became a dinosaur or a bird, and that bird became a dinosaur. I don't know what the order is in their mind, but it didn't happen that way. It couldn't have happened that way. There's too much design. We can't, even with our technology today, design something that filters as good as the liver does. All right? We can't design a camera that works as good as the eyeball does. We can't design a computer that works as good as the brain does. And God did all this, and He does this every day in the lives of people that are having children. And the act of creation keeps on going on in God. And so to say otherwise is incredible. And so it's so complex, it's so amazing that we couldn't say any other way. And so in Psalms 14:1, it says, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." And when you think about it in these terms, when you look at what God has made, how can anybody say that this happened any other way? And it's just a denial of who God is. It's a denial of the Creator. And so, and I don't know about you, but this encourages my faith. This encourages me, because to think that God loves us. Of all the places in the whole world, in the whole universe, in the whole galaxy, God created this place here. And you look at the magnitude of God. Like it said, there's 50 billion galaxies or whatever. I saw another video, and I'd encourage you to go see it, but it shows the how big things are, and it shows the planets, and then it shows Earth, and then it shows Venus, and then Earth, and then Saturn, and then Jupiter, and then it shows the sun, and it keeps on getting bigger, and they get to these bigger stars and these bigger stars, and then finally they get to this star called Canis Majoris, and that means big dog. All right, the big dog star is this big, and I can't remember how many kilometers around it is, but they said if you took a jet plane and you traveled at the surface of this planet, of this sun, 900 kilometers per hour, it would take you 1,100 years to go around it once. That's how big it is. And it's interesting, in Genesis account, I just want to read this one last thing here, and I'll be done. But in the Genesis account, it's almost like it's a side note. And God said in verse 14, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. Like, it's just like, he just made the stars also. 100 billion, trillion, or whatever it was, you know, and as big as they are, and as massive and as far out. And that's the God that we serve. And he cared for us, and he knows who we are, that even if a sparrow falls from its nest, he knows about it, you know, and how much more does he care for each of us? That's the God that we serve. He is the creator. There's no doubt about it. All right, thank you for your attention.